My mother lied about my father. Now I'm living next door to him. I never imagined that sentence would make any sense in real life, let alone be mine. But here I am, standing on the sun-warmed driveway of my new house on Ashgrove Lane, staring across the hedge at the man who, according to my mother, didn't want to raise me. He waves. I wave back. Simple as that. Like neighbors do. I drop the last box onto the porch and wipe the sweat off my forehead with the back of my hand. The movers had bailed on me last minute, which felt like the universe's way of saying, "Welcome to your new life, sucker. You're doing it alone, again." The house was modest but charming. White siding, blue shutters, a backyard with a wild patch of garden that would take weeks to tame, and a massive oak tree stretching its limbs over both my lawn and the neighbors. It smelled like old wood and something sweet, maybe cinnamon or moldy cookies. The realtor called it cozy. I called it needs work but has potential, which, now that I think about it, also described my entire life. I was halfway through unloading my books when my phone buzzed. Mom. I knew that ringtone, sharp and clingy, like her tone when I told her I bought the house. I swiped to answer. "Hey, Mom, are you still unpacking?" she asked, not even bothering with a hello. "Literally still carrying boxes," I said, balancing my phone on my shoulder while dragging a duffel inside. She sighed, the kind of sigh she used when I did something that didn't fit her version of my life. "I still don't understand why you didn't look at that condo in Oak Ridge. This neighborhood, it's so affordable," I offered. "Old," I bit back a reply. "It's quiet. It has a yard. I need quiet right now." She went quiet herself. Then, in a clipped tone, "Just be careful. Not every neighborhood is what it seems. Thanks for the horror movie trailer. Gotta go." Still carrying my entire adult life inside, she didn't say goodbye, just hung up. I tossed the phone on the kitchen counter and stared at the boxes. This place wasn't just a move. It was supposed to be a reset. After Ava left and took half the apartment furniture with her, I decided I didn't want sleek and modern anymore. I wanted something rooted, something that didn't make me feel like I was renting my own life. Out front, I heard the low hum of a lawnmower and stepped onto the porch. There he was again, the man next door, early 60s, I guessed, tall, slightly stooped, wearing a well-worn flannel shirt despite the heat. His salt and pepper hair was combed neatly back, and he pushed the mower with slow but steady effort. He caught my eye and smiled, not one of those tight neighborly grimaces, but a real smile, warm and open, like he was genuinely glad to see me. I smiled back, lifting a hand. "Hey there." He stopped the mower and nodded. "Afternoon. You just moved in?" "Yeah, this morning. I'm Mason." He walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans before offering one. "Robert. Welcome to Ashgrove Lane." His handshake was firm but not overbearing. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he was measuring every inch of my face, trying to place it somewhere familiar. "You from around here?" he asked. "Grew up about 30 minutes away. Just needed a change." He nodded, his eyes still studying me for a second longer than normal. "Well, you picked a quiet street. Everyone minds their own business here. Sounds perfect." There was a short pause before he added, almost softly, "You look familiar." I laughed awkwardly. Maybe I've got one of those faces. Maybe. He didn't say more, just nodded again, then turned back to his mower and started it up. I went inside, but the way he looked at me lingered, not in a creepy way. It was something else. Recognition, maybe, like he was seeing a ghost or something close to it. That night, after most of the boxes were emptied and the bed was halfway made, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked out into the backyard. Robert's house sat quietly in the dark, porch light glowing faintly. A single lamp was lit in what looked like a study, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen him before, not just today, somewhere else, somewhere buried deep in memory. A man's voice, soft and warm, a lullaby, a chair creaking beside a crib. No face, just a feeling. I shook it off. Probably nothing, just a weird coincidence, right? The water heater sputtered, groaned, and gave one last sad wheeze before going completely silent. "Of course," I muttered. Tapping the side of the unit like that would scare it back into working. I crouched in the dim garage, flashlight tucked between my neck and shoulder, tools scattered around me like a failed attempt at masculinity. I'd watched 3 YouTube tutorials and was still somehow making things worse. The summer evening was starting to settle in, warm air rolling in through the open garage door, carrying the hum of cicadas and the smell of fresh-cut grass. I was sweating, covered in dust, and just about to give up and call a plumber when I heard footsteps behind me. "You all right in there?" I turned and saw Robert standing at the edge of the driveway, holding a small bag of tools. He was wearing a faded baseball cap this time, still in that same flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms lined with age and calluses. "Not really," I admitted. "I think I offended this thing, or possibly murdered it." He chuckled, stepping inside. "Mind if I take a look? I used to teach engineering, mostly mechanical stuff, but I've had my hands in a few of these over the years." I hesitated, but then handed him the flashlight. "Be my guest. It's already dying. At this point, you're doing a mercy mission." He knelt down with ease, flashlight in one hand, adjusting valves and examining the connections like it was second nature. I watched, feeling a strange mix of relief and shame. Relief that someone knew what they were doing, shame that it wasn't me. Robert spoke while he worked, voice low and calm. "These models, they get touchy after 10 years. Looks like a pressure valve problem. Nothing major, you're just saying that to make me feel better." "Well," he grinned, partly. I laughed and leaned against the workbench. "So you taught engineering?" 30 years, he said, still focused on the water heater. "Community college mostly. Retired now. I still tinker with stuff. Old radios, lawnmowers. Keeps me from going stir-crazy." "That explains the neat garage," I said. "Mine looks like a tool store exploded." He glanced around. "You'll settle in. It takes time." There was a long pause, the kind that wasn't awkward, just easy. Peaceful. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a conversation like that with anyone, let alone a neighbor. Finally, he stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Give it a try." I twisted the knob. The heater kicked in with a healthy rumble. "Seriously?" Robert shrugged. "Sometimes all it needs is a little patience." "I owe you a beer," I said. He smiled. "I won't say no." We sat out back on the patio, 2 lawn chairs I hadn't unpacked yet, and 2 cold beers from the fridge. The sky was turning that bruised purple you only get at the end of a hot day. Fireflies started blinking in the garden, and somewhere down the block, a sprinkler hissed to life. "Been here long?" I asked. 15 years. Bought the place after my wife passed. Quiet neighborhood. Good people. Mostly." I nodded. I could use quiet. He didn't press, just took a sip of his beer and looked out at the big oak tree. "You remind me of someone," he said after a while. I turned to him. "Oh?" "Yeah. A long time ago." He paused. "You ever meet someone and feel like you should have met them sooner?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. I guess. He didn't elaborate, just leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes like he was listening to something only he could hear. I studied his face again. The lines around his eyes, the slope of his nose, something familiar tugged at me, deep in the chest. That look he gave me when we first met, like recognition, like surprise, like memory. And then something flickered in the back of my mind. A scent, a lullaby, a rocking chair creaking against the floor. I couldn't place it, couldn't reach it, but it was there. "You okay?" Robert asked, breaking my trance. "Yeah," I said quickly, "just thinking." He smiled gently, like he understood something I didn't. As the night deepened, I cleaned up the tools and thanked him again. He waved it off like it was nothing. But as I closed the door behind me and stood alone in the quiet, I couldn't stop the question forming in my mind. Who exactly was Robert, and why did being near him feel so much like coming home to a place I didn't know I'd lost? Rain tapped steadily against the living room window, like a quiet warning. The kind of evening that made everything feel heavier, more intimate. I'd meant to finish unpacking the rest of the boxes in the hallway, but instead I found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of an old storage tub I hadn't opened in years. It was labeled Mason, Childhood. Inside, a mess of old school papers, drawings, birthday cards from relatives I barely remembered, and a few faded envelopes tied together with string. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but something tugged at me. The weight of the last few days, the strange comfort of Robert's presence, and the uncomfortable familiarity I couldn't shake. I needed answers. Or maybe just distraction. I pulled out a stack of old photographs. One by one, I flipped through them. Me as a toddler in a dinosaur onesie, my third grade science fair project, a Halloween costume that should have been burned instead of immortalized. And then I froze. There it was, a photo of my mother, younger, softer, her hair longer, smile wider. She looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her arms were around a man who looked exactly like Robert, not similar, not close. It was him. He looked younger, maybe mid-30s, in a plaid shirt and jeans, his arm wrapped casually around my mother's shoulder. His other hand rested on the back of a high chair. I was in it too. Maybe 1-year-old, chubby cheeks and a messy bib. The world tilted. I sat there, staring at the photo like it would rearrange itself into something that made sense. But it didn't. It couldn't, because if this was true, if that was Robert in the photo, then my entire life had just been turned inside out. She told me he left. She told me he didn't want us. She told me he disappeared before I was old enough to remember. But Robert lived next door. He had looked at me like he knew me. He did know me. I felt cold, even in the warm yellow light of the living room. And then suddenly I remembered something. I must have been 5 or 6. My mother had gotten a letter in the mail. I remembered it because she opened it at the kitchen table and immediately started crying. She didn't say a word, just tore it in half, then again and again, until it was nothing but confetti. I'd asked her what was wrong. She'd said, "It's nothing, sweetie, just trash from the past." At the time, I believed her. Now I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my phone, hands slightly trembling, and hit her name in my contacts. She picked up on the second ring. "Mason," she said, her voice cautious. "It's late. I found an old box," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Photos. From when I was a baby." There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough. And there's one of you, with a man. A man who looks exactly like my neighbor. His name's Robert." Silence. Then her voice, clipped and sharp like a blade. "Don't dig where you don't want rot." I blinked. What does that even mean? It means some things are better left buried. Why? I demanded. Because it's easier for you? Because I've spent my entire life thinking my father didn't want me, that he vanished? She exhaled, not a sigh, something more brittle. "He wasn't who you think he is." "I don't think he's anyone. You never let me." "Mason, please," she said, softer now. "Let sleeping dogs lie." But I couldn't, not now. "I think I have a right to know the truth," I said. "I think I deserved it 20 years ago." She didn't respond. I hung up before I could say anything I'd regret. The house felt too quiet after that, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from something being pulled away. I stood and walked to the window, the photo still clutched in my hand. Outside, across the yard, Robert sat alone on his front porch in a weathered wooden chair. A book rested on his knee, but he wasn't reading. He was staring at the sky. His face was tilted slightly upward, lit faintly by the porch light. The rain didn't touch him. He just sat there, calm, like he was waiting for something, or someone. That same ache returned in my chest, that strange, disorienting grief for something I never knew I'd lost. He looked small from here, quiet, but not empty. And suddenly I knew this wasn't over, not even close. The kettle started to hiss, steam curling like a slow breath through the air. I didn't move to shut it off right away. I stood by the counter, staring at the photograph again, worn now at the corners from being handled too many times in the last 24 hours. My mother, Robert. Me in the high chair, frozen in time between two people who never told me the same version of the past. I had invited him over, just texted, "Can you come by tonight? I need to talk." He'd replied, "Sure, just let me know when." Now it was almost 8 p.m. The rain had passed, but the sky was still low and heavy, the kind of gray that made everything feel like a memory. There was a knock. I turned off the kettle and opened the door. Robert stood there, freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt tucked into dark jeans. His posture was polite, almost nervous, like he knew what this was. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Thanks." He followed me into the kitchen. I gestured toward the table. "Tea?" "Sure," he said. "If it's not too much trouble." I poured hot water into 2 mugs and set them down. Then I reached into my back pocket and placed the photo on the table between us. He didn't touch it, but he looked at it for a long time. Then quietly I asked, "Is this you?" He closed his eyes and nodded. "Yes." "That's your mother. And that's you. It was like a string in my chest pulled too tight and snapped. I didn't know what I was expecting. Denial? Shock? Some story about a look-alike? But not this. Not the simple, painful truth. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. His fingers rested on the table's edge. Because I wasn't sure you even knew who I was. And if you didn't, well, I figured that meant your mother didn't want me anywhere near you. I swallowed hard. She told me you left, that you didn't want a kid, that you bailed when I was a baby. He looked down at the tea. She left. The words were quiet but final. She packed up one day while I was at work, took you and disappeared. No note, no warning, just gone. I blinked. That's not what she told me. She wouldn't, he said gently. Because if she admitted that, she'd have to admit she made a decision for both of us. I gripped the edge of the chair. I wanted to marry her, he said. I asked. Twice. I was working 2 jobs at the time, part-time teaching and auto repair on weekends. We weren't rich, we weren't polished, but I loved her. And I loved you. I stared at him. You remember me? He smiled, bittersweet. You had this laugh. It sounded like hiccups. You hated mashed peas. You used to hold onto my fingers so tight I thought you'd never let go. I felt something crack open in my chest, something raw and unsure and furious. I looked for you, he continued. I went to her sister's house, her old job, the daycare. Nothing. She changed her number. She even changed her last name. I wrote letters. Most came back unopened or marked return to sender. I hired someone, once, but she moved again before anything came of it. Jesus, I whispered. So she made sure you couldn't find us. He nodded. I never stopped looking, he said. I just stopped hoping. I leaned back in my chair, the room spinning in soft, slow circles. So you didn't leave us. She left you. I would have raised you, Mason. Maybe not perfectly, but I would have tried. I wanted to. But my entire childhood had been shaped by the story of the man who disappeared. The absence that became part of who I was. I had built walls around that pain, learned to laugh it off, to say I was better off without him. And now he was sitting in my kitchen, drinking chamomile tea like a ghost who had come back to life. Why didn't you just knock on the door when I moved in? I asked suddenly. Why wait? He gave a sad smile. Because I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I didn't want to crash into your life if I wasn't welcome. Silence stretched between us again. I looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time I realized how tired he looked. Not just old. Worn. Like someone who'd carried grief in silence for decades. I don't know what to do with this, I admitted. You don't have to do anything, he said softly. But I'm next door if you ever want to talk, or just beat. He stood slowly and headed toward the door, pausing just before he left. You don't owe me anything, Mason, but I'm glad I got to see you again. And then he was gone. I sat there long after he left, the photo still lying on the table, the tea gone cold. My mother had always said she was protecting me. But from what? A man who remembered my laugh. A man who never stopped searching? I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I did know this. Something inside me was burning, and it was only getting hotter. I didn't call before I showed up at my mother's house. I didn't want to give her time to prepare her version of the truth. The sky was heavy again, the air thick and gray. Her street felt the same as always, sterile trimmed hedges and beige sameness. Nothing had changed except me. I parked in front of her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like I needed something to hold on to. Then I got out, walked up the front steps and knocked. She opened the door after a few seconds, still in her housecoat, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Her face flickered, surprise first, then concern, and finally, something harder to read. Mason, she said, is everything all right? No, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The living room smelled like lemon polish and old paper. The furniture hadn't moved in years. I placed the photograph on the glass coffee table like it was evidence in a trial. She looked down at it and went very, very still. For a moment she didn't say a word. Then she lowered herself slowly into the armchair. You found that? I did, I said. And I found him too. He lives next door. Her fingers curled around the edge of the chair. I know. I flinched. You knew? This whole time? I recognized him the day you moved in. But I didn't think you would. Why did you lie to me? She exhaled, deep and slow. Because I had to. Because I was trying to protect you. From what? From having a father who actually wanted to raise me? She gave a sharp laugh, humorless, bitter. He wasn't fit to be a father. He was a dreamer, Mason. A sweet-talking, broke, aimless man who thought love could pay the bills. He told me he wanted to marry you. He did, twice. And both times I said no, because I knew better, because I wanted a real life, a stable life. Not one where we barely scrape by on promises and part-time jobs. I stared at her. So you took me and disappeared. I left before it got worse. Worse how? Her voice cracked. He wanted a child, Mason, not a family. He loved the idea of being a dad, but he didn't know how to actually be one. You never gave him a chance, and he never fought hard enough for one, she shot back. He sent letters, one, maybe two. He didn't come after us. He said he did. She looked away. He should have tried harder. Maybe, I said, voice tightening. You should have let him try. She blinked, like I'd slapped her. I took a step back. I spent my whole life thinking I wasn't wanted, I said, thinking I was abandoned. And you let me believe that. You built my identity on it. You fed me a lie so often I stopped questioning it. She stood now, arms folded tight across her chest. Do you think I did that lightly? That it didn't hurt me too? I think you made a choice, I said. And maybe you thought it was right, but it wasn't yours alone to make. Silence filled the room like smoke, bitter and clinging. She sat down again, this time slower, older. I was alone, she whispered. I was 23. My parents disowned me. I had no job, no savings, and he was full of big ideas and no plans. I panicked. I watched her, not as my mother, but as a woman I was only beginning to understand. She looked smaller than I remembered, more human, more flawed. You've always hated weakness, I said softly. She looked up at me. I didn't want you to grow up resenting me. I swallowed, too late. That stung, for both of us. She didn't cry. Sarah Turner didn't cry. But her mouth trembled slightly, and her eyes glistened in a way I wasn't used to seeing. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said. I know. It was the closest I could come to forgiveness. I didn't say goodbye when I left, just opened the door and stepped out into the cooling evening air. The world outside felt different, tilted, like the foundation of everything I'd believed had shifted a few degrees off center. I didn't know who was right, maybe neither of them, maybe both. But I knew one thing for sure, nothing about my past was what I thought it was, and nothing about my future was going to be simple. Robert's house smelled like tea and old paper, the comforting kind of old, like a library, not like decay. His living room was warm, filled with quiet things, books in tall wooden shelves, soft yellow lamplight, a grandfather clock ticking patiently in the corner. He led me through to a smaller room off the main hallway, a study with a worn leather armchair and a desk scattered with notebooks, old photographs, and a kettle steaming on a trivet. I wasn't sure if you'd come, he said, pouring 2 cups of tea and handing me one. I took it and sat down. I wasn't either. He nodded, like that made perfect sense. There was a cardboard box near his feet, carefully sealed with old yellowing tape. He bent down, placed it gently on the table between us, and looked at me. I want to show you something, he said, if that's all right. I nodded, slowly. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some still sealed, others torn at the edges. All of them addressed in the same handwriting, Mason Turner. Some had been sent to my childhood home. Others had no address at all, just the words, please forward if possible. Robert picked one up and turned it so I could see the front. There was a red stamp across it. Return to sender, address unknown. He gave a small, sad smile. That one was for your 6th birthday. I sent a Lego set with it. It got returned, too. I took the envelope from him, my fingers shaking just slightly, and opened it. Inside was a letter written in blue ink, careful, printed handwriting, not cursive, the kind you use when you're trying to make sure a child can read it. Dear Mason, happy birthday. You're getting so big. I hope you like the Legos. I remember you liked to build towers out of everything. I miss you more than you can imagine. I stopped reading. There was a second envelope underneath it. This one marked graduation, if I ever find him. I didn't open that one. I couldn't yet. Instead, I reached down and pulled out a folded piece of paper. No envelope, no note. A drawing, crayon, a stick figure family, a smiling boy in the middle. two taller figures on either side, labeled me, Mommy, Daddy. I stared at it for a long time. You drew that, Robert said softly. You left it in my apartment the day you both left. I kept it, moved with it, packed it every time I changed houses. I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was the only thing I had that told me you remembered me, even a little. I swallowed a lump in my throat, but it didn't go away. You kept all of this? I asked. He nodded. I didn't know what else to do with it. I couldn't throw it away. It was too much, too kind, too sad, too real. I had imagined for years a father who vanished, a man who didn't care, a shadow who left a hole. But this wasn't a hole. This was a presence I'd never seen, a quiet, stubborn love that had no room to exist but lived anyway, in envelopes and crayon drawings and faded hopes. I don't know what to say, I whispered. You don't have to, he said. We sat in silence. The kettle hissed again on the stove, forgotten. Rain started to fall lightly against the windows as if the world knew how fragile this moment was. Finally, I looked at him. I can't promise I'll forgive her. Not now. Maybe not ever. He nodded, eyes steady. But maybe, I said, voice cracking a little. Maybe I can get to know you. Then, for the first time, Robert cried, not loudly, not messily, just two tears that ran down the lines of his face as he nodded again, unable to speak. I stood, and he did too. For a moment we just looked at each other, two people with 1,000 unspoken years between them. Then he said, there's a trail behind the neighborhood. Goes past the creek and the old mill. I walk it when I need to think. I glanced out the window at the rain. You up for a walk now? He smiled. Always? We grabbed our jackets and stepped outside. The rain had softened into mist. The world smelled like wet leaves and second chances, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I wasn't walking alone. The morning sun poured across the porch like honey. It was one of those rare, perfect Sundays, warm but not hot, quiet but not too quiet. The neighborhood still slept, birds chattered in the oak tree, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen behind me. Robert sat at the edge of the porch with a wrench in his hand, and a stubborn old bicycle balanced upside down between us. Rust clung to the chain, and the back wheel was bent, but it wasn't about fixing it. It was about something else. I bought this bike the week before you turned 3, he said, tightening a bolt. I had this idea you'd learn to ride with me running alongside, holding the seat. You'd fall, scrape your knees, cry a little, but I'd be there to pick you up. I passed him the oil can. You always hold on to plans like that? I asked. Just the good ones, he said with a small grin. The bicycle had been in his shed all these years. Still had the faded blue paint, a worn-out Spider-Man sticker on the frame, and training wheels packed in a box nearby. The dream never came true, not back then, but I guess neither of us had fully let it go. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch. The thing about healing I'd learned is that it doesn't come with some dramatic breakthrough. It shows up like this, in shared tools, dumb jokes about rusty chains, and early morning sunlight on wood floors. A kind of peace that sneaks in without knocking. You ever think we'll be normal? I asked. Robert chuckled. I don't know what that means. Yeah, I said. Me either. He stood and tested the pedals. The back wheel wobbled less now. Progress, I guess. We leaned the bike against the porch railing and sat in the chairs side by side, the same ones we'd used during that first beer weeks ago. Only now the air between us was easy. I'm glad you came back, he said after a while. I looked at him, the lines around his eyes, the scar on his hand from some old workshop accident, all the years he didn't get to raise me, and the quiet hope that maybe he still could know me. And I said it without thinking, without rehearsal. Thanks, Dad. He blinked. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't gasp or choke up. He just turned his head, smiled slow and steady, and nodded, like he'd been waiting a long time. And now he didn't have to wait anymore. We sat there for a while longer, not needing to fill the silence. Every once in a while, that kind of stillness feels like the most honest conversation you can have. Eventually, my phone buzzed. A text, for Mom. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Robert didn't ask. He didn't need to. I think he already knew. I put the phone back in my pocket without replying. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Maybe never. Because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a door you decide whether to open. And sometimes, you're just not ready to turn the handle. But I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I'd spent most of my life haunted by absence, by what I thought was abandonment. Now I knew better. I didn't choose how I was born, or who raised me, or which stories I was told, but I could choose who I stood beside now. And right now, I was sitting next to a man who never stopped trying, even when trying meant holding onto birthday letters with nowhere to send them. That had to count for something. That did count for something. The porch creaked as we stood. Robert picked up the bike again, smiling like a kid about to test his luck. "You want to try it out?" he asked. I laughed. "You're about 30 years too late." He winked. Never too late for some scraped knees. And maybe he was right. We walked down the driveway, the bike rolling gently between us, and the sun climbed higher behind the trees. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was home.